Hi guys, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to use Unified Remote as a virtual button box or remote control to control features in a flight simulator such as flaps, gear or anything else that can be bound really with a keybind. So Unified Remote's a pretty powerful piece of software that can control many things on your computer such as the power or lots of different apps like Spotify, Chrome, that kind of thing. The free version has a few remote controls, but the $5 version is the version that we'll need in order to run custom remote controls. First of all, you'll need to install the server on your local PC and the app obviously on your phone or tablet. So probably the easiest way to familiarize yourself with the remote setup is to have a look at the example of the DCS IL2 remote that I've provided. Inside you'll find four files. There is the meta file, which is a very simple file and has information for the server about the remote. Then there is the layout file, which is, well, self-explanatory. Then there is the remote, which controls the keystrokes. Finally, there's an icon file, which can be small or large, and you can just Google and download from the internet any icon you like. There's also a README file, which you can delete after having read it carefully, of course. For this tutorial we're going to be using Google Docs and Sheets, though you could of course use Microsoft Word and Excel if you wanted to. We're also going to be using the excellent and free Notepad++. I'll leave the links in the comments and in the supporting document. The first thing we'll need to do is get the keybinds from whatever application you're using. In this one I'm going to use DCS, so we'll go to settings and get the keybinds there. We'll copy and paste those to a new spreadsheet in order to create our keybinds reference. And if you're a little bit OCD, you'll be compelled to format it nicely. Unlike me, of course, I'm just doing it for example purposes. At the least, you'll have to change the order of the columns by clicking on the column header and dragging it left or right so that they fit our spreadsheet later on. I found that numbering them in their original order can help greatly in the future if you need to assimilate two lists after having made changes to one of them. And deleting unused rows and columns can definitely make it easier when scrolling around large spreadsheets. We're going to add tick boxes as this will make selecting and sorting the keybinds that we want much easier. Next we need to remove any special characters from the keybind list. So in DCS it seems to add a quotation marks and a hyphen. So we're going to remove those by searching using Control H and find and replace menu. In this example we're going to use quotation marks and we leave the replace section empty and it will just delete the quotation marks. In the middle we have a space hyphen space that we just want to replace with a single space. This will leave us just with the bare characters, so you might have to remove other different characters depending on which sim you are exporting your list from. In the next step I'm just going to remove any functions that are not actually bound to any keys inside of the simulation at the moment. You can of course leave them there if you know you're going to use them. You'll notice that one of the fields is marked as an error, and this is because the equals sign in a spreadsheet is the beginning of an equation which is blank, so it's thrown an error. So I'm just going to write in equals instead. Now I'm going to organize the list to make it easier to navigate by sorting the columns. It's advised to pay attention to the order in which you sort the spreadsheet, as if you sort by column C first and then column B, the spreadsheet will be sorted by column B and subsorted by column C next, which is very useful. Finally, go through and select all of the keybinds that you want to export to the control, and then we're going to sort by those and copy and paste them to a new file. We're going to paste those values to a template spreadsheet that I've provided. Next we need to go through the labels list and edit the names, as these are going to become the names that are going to be on our buttons. I delete things like autopilot in this example, as the buttons are going to be fairly small. We're not going to be able to fit a lot of text on them, and it's going to be obvious from the category what the button is referring to, so I don't need the label autopilot. Go through the list and make changes to the button names so that they suit you. A handy tip is that instead of having to go through and change every single instance of a word, you can just highlight a bunch of them and then use Ctrl and H to delete them all in one go. Next, highlight the top row of columns D to P, and the bottom right hand corner you want to left click and hold that, there's a little blue square, and drag that down to fill down the columns. Copy and paste over the label list to the button name and command name columns. Then using Ctrl and H, we need to remove all of the spaces and any other characters that are in the command name. The command name can only be one word with no spaces or any other special characters. Check the list carefully and remove any that you find. Open a new Google document and copy columns D to I and paste them into the new document. Be sure to paste without formatting using Ctrl-Shift-V. The point of this is to use the Ctrl and H menu and replace the space with nothing in order to join the code into one line. Copy and paste this back into our original document. And that is the code for our layout file completed. Next we're going to move on to the remote file. We're going to copy the command name list to the actions list, and these need to be the same word because they are linked. They link the two parts of the remote control. Then we need to copy the keybinds to the remote list. Every part of the keybinds needs to be surrounded by quotation marks and separated with a comma. We do this by using the fabulous Ctrl-H menu and replace the space with a quotation mark, comma, space, quotation mark. The quotation marks on the outsides are already there in the surrounding columns, so we don't need to add them. As before, we'll copy and paste into the document to remove the blank spaces and unify the code into one line. Remembering to paste with Ctrl-Shift-V again. Damn it. As before, find and replace this space, I think it's a tab but it varies in length so I'm not sure, with nothing to join the code together. You can then paste it back into our original document if you like, but it's not strictly necessary as we're going to paste it into Notepad++ for the next step. Open Notepad and paste in the same text. So we want it to end up looking like the following example. So we're going to have to separate each line into 3 lines using the Control and H menu. We're going to replace the strategically placed asterisk with a new line using the Find and Replace menu. Make sure that the correct options are selected in the Find and Replace menu options. You'll have to make sure you have Extended selected. Replace the asterisk with a \n for new line, \t for tab. And then we're going to do the same with a hash to push end to a new line. Copy the header from the example file to the top of your new file and save the file as remote.lua. Go through it line by line and look for any non-alphabetic characters and make a note. We're going to have to change those to Unicode lines. Unified Remote doesn't send plain text non-alphabetical characters, so we have to change them to Unicode. I've provided the equivalent codes in the supporting document. If the character is preceded by a modifier key, for example shift comma, then you will need to use 3 lines, KB down plus the modifier key, then the character code, and then KB up plus the modifier key. So after all that badass matrix style coding, now we're going to change gears and get a little bit creative. Having just created the remote file, we now need to create the layout file. It's much easier in the long run to plan the layout in advance than try and figure it out as we go. The easiest way to do this is by using a table in a document. We could use a spreadsheet, but it's very difficult to drag text from each cell within a spreadsheet, so it's much easier to do that in a table. Plan each tab individually, moving around the buttons until you're happy with the result. You should end up with something that looks like this. Very pretty. It'll be much easier for us in a minute if we arrange all of the buttons by tab and then arrange those tabs alphabetically. So now we've planned it all out, let's make the real thing. Copy and paste the buttons for one tab into a new Notepad page and sort them lexigraphically, or alphabetically as it's otherwise known. Do the same with the next tab in a new sheet and then add them together. Finally, and we're almost there, we need to use our old friend Find and Replace to insert 2 tabs in front of the buttons. Do this by replacing the less than sign with \t, which will insert 2 tabs, and don't forget to insert another less than sign with the extended menu selected. Having planned our layout earlier on, we now need to create a blank template that we're now going to fill with these buttons. Here is a blank example, and here is what the final product should look like. So we're now going to paste our buttons to the bottom of our template. Double click to select the whole line and drag them to the appropriate place. This will be much easier now because they're in alphabetical order and in order of tabs, so you just need to put them in the order inside the framework. Remember, the buttons flow left to right, and at the end of each row you need an end row, and then the beginning of each row you need a new row marker. If you look at the examples I've given you, the layout will become obvious. If you need a space between 2 buttons, copy and paste the space code. Finally, you'll just need to edit the color for each button, the weight, which changes the size of the button relative to the other buttons around it, and also whether the button needs to just be pressed or held in order to activate the button function. For a time-saving tip, you can select a whole bunch of lines and change a single value in all of them at the same time using the In Selection checkbox underneath the Find and Replace boxes. When finished, be sure to check all the lines have no extra code at the end on the outside of the greater than sign. I like to highlight them all, and that way it's easier to see if there are any extra bits of code hanging on. Alleluia, praise be, you've finished. Hopefully. Now it's time to check the results. Double-click the Unified Remote server button in the system tray and it will open a web page. Go to Restart Server. Reload Remotes doesn't do anything apparently. Let it restart and then hit the remotes on the top left and hopefully your remote will be in the list. To add your remotes to your tablet or phone, click on the green plus icon and then on Other. Click on the remote and it will be added to your device. Remember that you need to refresh the server before you do this. If your remote isn't in the list, don't panic. Just follow the following guide on troubleshooting. I highly advise you to name your remote with an A to start with so that it's easy to find at the top of the list if you're having troubles. The first thing to do is decide which is the problem. Is it the layout file or is it the remote? It's extremely unlikely to be the meta file because it's so simple. So the best way is just to delete the remote file, as that's normally the problem. Restart the server, and if it's there, then you know that it is the remote file that is the problem. If, for example, it wasn't there, then you know that it was the layout or both that was the problem. Go back to the folder and press Ctrl-Z to put the file back. A quick way to check for problems is by scanning the far left-hand side of the note, and you'll notice that there are some lines that begin with action and end with end. If there are any problems, these might be joined up. If you can't find the problem by scanning the file, then the best way is to go through it systematically and delete half the files, say the top half first, refresh the Unified Remote server. If it's still not there, then it's probably the bottom half. Put back the top, delete the bottom half. When you find which half has the problem, then half that half until eventually you get down to which line is the problem. In this example, I'm going to delete the top half of the code and refresh the server and see if the remote appears. Don't forget to push save to save the changes to disk, or otherwise there will be no change for the server to send to the remote. In this example, after refreshing, the remote still isn't there, so it's probably the bottom half of the code, or both. Going back to the file, click undo or press Ctrl Z to undo the delete. Let's delete the bottom half of the code, not forgetting to press save, and see if it appears in the list. It does, fantastic. So we know the problem is in the bottom half of that code somewhere. We could keep going, deleting half of each half of each half until we find the exact line where the problem is, but it turns out the problem's right at the bottom. You can do the same with the layout file, but you have to preserve formats, so rows have to begin and end, and tabs have to begin and end with the appropriate lines. So the most efficient way to test your remote control is to go to controls in the game sim and press all the buttons and see if they're correctly bound to the functions. Congratulations, if you've made it this far, you deserve a beer, or perhaps a nice cup of tea. So now's probably a good time to mention that there is an issue with the length of key presses. So any buttons that require a key press longer than, say, 0.1 of a second don't register. This is an issue for buttons that need to be held down, such as a starter switch or the opening and closing of radiator shutters, for example. There is also a problem in IL2 where half the time it doesn't seem to register the modifier key, so say the shift in front of another key. So shift G, for example, just registers as G half the time, and I'm not sure why that is. I think it might have to do with the length of the key press, and it's too quick for IL2, and I don't know any way of increasing the length of the key presses. In DCS there's no such problem. In regards to the length of the key presses, perhaps auto hotkey could be a solution where a key press triggers an auto hotkey key press, and I know auto hotkey can have a length of key press stated, but I don't really know much about auto hotkey, so someone else would have to shout out with help for that one. Let me know in the comments below if you have any suggestions or ideas for improvements. I'd just like to say thanks to the community who've helped me out a lot. I hope some of you can benefit from this tutorial. Over and out.